Hello, welcome to Portal's Portfolio series, where we will have readings and interviews with student writers and published authors from Vancouver Island University and around the country. We'll talk with them about what it takes to be a writer in the ever-changing world of publishing. Portal 2021 is currently being designed by Chantal Calitz, and all 104 gorgeous color pages will be shipped off to the printer on March 24th. It'll be on newsstands in late May. Stay tuned for information about our 30th anniversary virtual launch to be live streamed on Facebook in mid-April. It'll feature contributor readings and merch such as new t-shirts, mugs, and book bags to mark 3 decades of publishing in the heart of Vancouver Island. Hello, everybody. I am excited to have Juanessa Prince with me today on the Portfolio series. Juanessa is a Plains Cree woman in her 3rd year of studies at Vancouver Island University, where she is majoring in sociology with a minor in creative writing. Juanessa's poem Indians in Space will be published in Portal 2021, due out next month. This will be her first publication, and today Juanessa Prince joins me from Nanaimo. Juanessa, welcome to the Portfolio series.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, a little bit nervous about it, but
oh don't be.
For sure.
In my creative writing classes, I run into quite a few people that are taking sociology and creative writing together, and I was wondering what it was about those two fields that seem to be connected. What is it for you that kind of connects sociology and creative writing?
I think it kind of helps me understand more what I'm writing about when I choose to write about things too. Like both go very hand in hand, I think, because sociology is all about, cycles and patterns and people and interactions. And I think it helps me understand as a writer how well I need to understand what I'm writing about. And I think it does really, like, sociology and the discipline, it's really about like social movements and community and a lot of issues in today's world. And I think it helps me keep informed about things that I should be writing about or shouldn't be writing about, or how important things can be with prejudice and racism within writing, and how to acknowledge it and within like writing and that discipline. So I think it helps me keep informed, and it's really I think there's lots of compliments for it, especially if you're wanting to write about tricky subjects like racial injustice and other movements. Today, a lot of, like, with Asian hate and Black Lives Matter, it's really at the forefront, and COVID and everything, a lot of that is on people's minds. And I think it's really good for, as writers, to be informed about that and informed about communities when you're writing about communities.
Do you think that the sociology brings more of a social relevance to your writing?
I'm not too sure. I wrote before I ever like went into sociology discipline. Like, I just took sociology as an off chance, and I just really liked it as a discipline. So I think more so I always kind of reflected stuff, like the stuff happening around me, on writing and what I wrote. So being in sociology kind of, it just changed my writing. I don't think it influenced it too much, but I think everything around me I usually put into my writing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. What first brought you to writing? When did you first start creative writing?
I knew it was something that I wanted to take right into university, so I took that right away. But like, I've always like wrote kind of like as like a stress reliever. Like, I always wrote since I was like 10, 11. I used to write poetry and stuff, and it was always just like really like emotional. Like, I'm really weird about sharing it because it's always just like letting everything out. Like, that's my way of expressing really like big emotions and stuff for me. So that's always like one way that I did it, because it was really nice to kind of just like write short stories or poems and then kind of close it and put it away and be able to come back to it when you can. So I think like I always did that, and then I started more focusing on stories. And the only time I ever actually shared any poetry was when I took intro to poetry like this last September, this past one. And then before that, I've never shared any of my poetry before ever, because I always like real nervous about it. But it's been exciting for sure. And my professor actually told me to suggested that I go and submit this piece. So it's like, okay.
Excellent. Who are some of the authors or books that have inspired you to write or have influenced your writing?
I think specifically with poetry on influencing my writing, Billy Ray Belcourt. I'm not sure if you know any of what he's written, but I didn't read much poetry either. Like it was kind of like I said, like always just like a side thing that I did. I was more focused on short story writing. So when I took the intro to poetry, I started reading more, but like Emily Dickinson, I started reading some of her. I really liked what she had to like write, just because it was very like ambiguous, didn't really know everything to it, and I really liked that. And it was very like dramatic and over the top for me too, which I liked. And Billy Ray Belcourt I really liked as like an expression for indigeneity and the way that he goes about his writing, and just like everything about it I really love in his writing. And I think that was definitely something that I wanted to try and like, I think like sometimes you try and imitate writers when you like the way they write. And I think I'm definitely in the phase where I'm trying to like imitate a lot of like what he's doing in the way of expressing himself.
Excellent. There's nothing wrong with everyone does that at the beginning. Even if you're playing music or writing or painting, you try to emulate the pieces that you really love, and then you work up from there and you find your own voice.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find VIU? What brought you to VIU?
I used to live in Grand Prairie, Alberta, and when I graduated high school, one of my friends, when she applied here, and I just moved with her, and I took a year off school, and I just wanted to get out of Grand Prairie and go somewhere new. And then I was here for about a year, and I just like, okay, I want to go back to school now. So I went back to university and school. I did like 1 year minimum wage job, and I was like, And so I just ended up applying to VIU here and going here, because I already lived here and she was going. So
Perfect. Now your poem Indians in Space is going to be published next month in Portal 2021, which is really exciting. Would you please read your poem?
yeah. So I have it here. Indians in Space. I do not know the word God in my traditional tongue. I swear never to capitalize it. I read the Bible, but only feel creator when the wind whistles. My thoughts are formed in English, so I never truly know what I am saying. In a galaxy of adamantine colonial power, I am a dying star. I expand into the universe before being smothered by darkness, light stolen from fading particles. We were only specks against an unspeakable backdrop of horror I failed to understand. Like a planet out of orbit, I do not have a place in this progress, this solar system. I long for the freedom of a galaxy nourished by my ancestors of the plains, where the moon told her stories, the stars whispered directions, and spirits danced. When our economy was gratitude, soul, mind, spirit entwined in our hair, and our names earned. At first, they called us Indians. Then they took that from us too.
Thank you. It's very powerful. I love at the beginning, I do not know the word God. You refer to word and language and then the creator on the wind. But of course, language and voice is a wind that we produce ourselves. So there's this intersection of us creating our speaking the word God with our own wind, but then the wind of the creator Is that what was your inspiration for that, or how did you think about that?
I and because I went to school in Alberta and I grew up in Alberta, and their Catholic education is public education. So I went to Catholic school from grade 5 and graduated at Catholic school. So I was always kind of um, around religion, around the Bible. Like even if you weren't religious, you could still go. So you still had to go to the prayers and communion in the church and stuff like that. And so I think I've always had like um, a weird backdrop of very traditional, cultural, indigenous upbringing and sense of God and the creator and Mother Earth. And then growing up and watching other people, especially religion and that history with Catholic religion as well. And so I think I always had like kind of a pushback between what I would read and what I would hear from elders and my parents, and just learning traditionally and the difference between that.
And that difference really shows up in your poem with the like the stars whispering and the wind whistling, and it's very kind of soft, like the creator in nature. But then you contrast that with the um, adamantine colonial power. I'm kind of a metal, unforgiving, or I looked up the word adamantium this morning because when you're talking about reading the Bible and then the word adamantium, I saw the word Adam in there, kind of Adam in the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to see if that word came from, had a root in, say, Adam, but it didn't. None of that showed up. But it's something that popped into my head. Is that something that when you chose, it's kind of a word that really stands out. Is that something that also you thought of when you were doing it?
I found the word adamantine on accident. I was the first version of this poem. I was trying to I wrote it for class for in poetry, and for an example of the lesson, he showed us something where a poem where every line of the poem had 10 syllables. So I tried to do, I want every line in this poem to have 5 syllables. And so I just was trying to work out a good transitionary word for colonization, which is 5 syllables. And then I found that, which is also 5 syllables. And I had to let the 5 syllable thing go because everybody was like, your line placing is really, really weird. Fix it. I'm like, oh. But yeah, I just Googled kind of words and went through thesaurus and down the line, and I found that. And that was what had worked best at that time. And it just really stuck, and people really liked the word.
Hmm. I often try to have my lines be 10 syllables as well, because I've read that it takes about 2 to 3 seconds to read that, which is about the same time as a heartbeat, which is
Oh,
also when you look at, like, I don't know, psychology, what the present is, our brain kind of takes in 2 to 3 seconds at a time and then logs it and then takes, so the present is about 2 to 3 seconds, which is about a heartbeat or a breath. So I often do that too, but I also try to use haikus a lot, which is like 5 syllables and then 7 syllables and then five. So I usually do a lot of haikus and then I join them up to try to be like 10 to 12 syllables. So I
yeah.
totally see how that would attract someone writing poetry.
Yeah, see, I never really was big on like the structure and everything of poetry. Like when you get down to the writing and the actual skill of it, I always just like word vomit on a page and then go for it, like go from there was always kind of my way about it. So this was actually the first poem where I ever sat down, and my intention with writing it was to use like some sort of actual skill or meter or rhythm to it. So that was my first like poem where I intended to do that, where it wasn't just like a vomit. And I think it is like one of the best things I've written. So it's definitely made me want to try and hone up skills in poetry as well.
It's amazing how much when you restrict what you're doing with words, how you get inspired, what kind of pops out of that. I'm big into form. I love using different forms and having different restrictions. And I kind of find free verse a bit boring sometimes when I read it.
Yeah, because that's all I ever used to do was free verse, and I always thought that of like more like the form, and then now that I've gone into it a little bit more, like it's definitely something that I enjoy more, and I definitely think it helps writing.
Hmm. The first time I read your poem, of course, like when during the submission process, of course the biggest line that stuck out to me was towards the end where it says they called us Indians, then they took that away from us too. And you mentioned that right after you talk about um, earning your name, and of course a name something you say, just like the voice, as we mentioned before, and and so there's kind of this idea that you have other people giving you names instead of earning your name, and I'd love to hear more about that. It's a very interesting statement.
Yeah, it's something that me and my brother always say to each other as a joke. Like they used to call us Indians, and I just thought like it's something we've always said, but I definitely think like it does the fact that they called us Indians, and when you go back to it too, that's not even they just called us that because they thought they were in India. And I think it's a good contrast between, and I mean that's for me it's a contrast with the language when I talk about, never knowing truly what you're saying is you call them Indians and they're not Indians. And that's what speaking English is like for Indigenous people, is calling people these things and that's not what they are. And in Indigenous culture, everything has a name and you need to ask what the name is. You don't just give it to, you don't just give it to a person. They earn it. It's who they are. It's what they are. And names are very important. And I know like a lot of my grandma, she had 18 other siblings, and a lot of them, like I didn't even know their first name. I just knew them by their nickname. And a lot of them, like that was over the years, they had accumulated a name and they called them the nickname. And that was kind of like an earned name, kind of a sentiment. And I think that's still like when you go into Indigenous cultures today, and a lot of people have nicknames and you don't call them by their first name. And I think that's kind of how like that kind of sense of names in Indigenous culture traveled through to where we are now in today's world. And I think names are important. They really are. And I think for me, that was just a big point to make about how different language wise and how important language is, especially with Indigenous people and the responsibility on Indigenous people to try and keep languages alive. And the fact that the way that you process, the way that you think, like the thought process is determined by the language you learn. Like there is an entirely different thought process between different languages because it forms the way you think. And so to be Indigenous and have that culture and be taught English and not know your actual language, for me, that's always been a struggle. And I think a lot of Indigenous people do. And I think like I'm coming to an age where it's learning that it's now a responsibility for people my age and younger, our language, and keeping that alive and learning it is no longer like an option. It's a responsibility if you want it to be there.
Do you speak your language?
I don't. I was somewhat learning when I was a little kid because we used to live near, like in the same city as my grandma, and I would always hang around her and her brothers and sisters and listen to them when they spoke Cree with each other, but they never taught their kids Cree. And then when I moved, I went to a native daycare, so they were teaching us Cree there, but in Grand Prairie, that's where we moved to, there wasn't that many resources for learning Cree, and it kind of just didn't get to actually learn it because we didn't have the resources once I went to grade school.
Hmm.
Yeah, I want to one day. Like I'm planning, I want
Mhm.
to soon try and learn Cree and get that back. That's my goal.
Do they have classes now and more resources for that?
I think here in Nanaimo, it's actually fairly good for resources. And I know in Grand Prairie too, they have a lot more resources than when I first moved there. Because when I first moved there, it was small town, middle of Alberta, like 30,000 people. So there wasn't that many people, but it's doubled in its size now, and they have a friendship center. And I think there's more resources there now. And there is more resources today to learn it, and that's why today, like, learning a language, especially if you're Indigenous, it is a responsibility.
Mhm. Another thing that stuck out to me in your poem was when you talked about the orbit, like a planet out of orbit, and then you mentioned freedom. I long for the freedom of a galaxy nourished. And I was wondering, I was like orbit and freedom. I was trying to connect those two, but then you said with your background in sociology, it's about cycles and when you're reading this, and I thought of orbit. Is that something when you're thinking of human nature or things going in cycles? Is that sort of connected to planets and orbits and
Yeah, that was my intent with that, like the system of how, like, and for me, I was mainly trying to focus and poke at the system of colonization, especially with referring to it before that, and because it is a system, and I think there's a lot of we think of capitalism, that's a system, and I think there are a lot of systems that we think are unbreakable or we can't change, or they're this or they're that, and it's like that's not how it always used to be. It never used to always be like this. There were people and societies that thrived and lived without these structures that we often tell each other we can't live without. And for me, it was just that this system doesn't work. It does not work for everybody. And I think, what, if it works for some people, freedom to it, but people should have an option to opt out of it. That's not to go on the poem, that's not the only solar system. There's other solar systems besides the Milky Way. There's other galaxies besides our galaxy. Why do we have to be trapped within colonization? Why do we have to trap ourselves in capitalism?
interesting? So do you see your poetry as a decolonization tool or something to try and chip away at these mindsets?
I think I've been, personally, and where I'm going on my journey as an Indigenous person, and especially in my studies and in sociology, I learn about that stuff. And I have my own feelings about it, because it's hard to go to a class and you're reading statistics and you're seeing these things, and other kids are just looking at it and saying, oh, just statistics and numbers, and you see family members or memories. And so for me, poetry is also a way to, for me to be able to focus in school and learn that and study that, and then just whatever feelings I have about it, then just blurt it out on the page. And I think that's what that mainly was, is just the struggle of being in a classroom and learning about this stuff, and just having personal connections to what you're learning as well.
What does your writing process look like? What does a writing day look like for you?
I'm working on doing better with it. I'm very coming out of my shell with it. I've never really been open about writing or wanting to write, and it's something that, as I've gone to university and done workshops, I've been able to work on writing more and making sure I'm doing that. And I'm still in this phase where I don't really set out time to write unless it's for assignments, but whenever I feel like writing or I get in a creative space, I go and I just sit in my room and I write, and I don't actually listen to any music or anything. I usually just try and, be in myself, be in whatever vibe I have going on, and catch an emotion. And I think that's a lot of what I try to do with my writing, is trying to catch an emotion. So when I get into an emotion, that's usually when I try to write, because it calms me. But I know I'm trying to work on being more skillful in that. And I know, like, that's one thing that I've been learning a lot, is adding skill and adding, discipline to writing to make it better, because it does make it better. And I know I need to work on adding more discipline to my writing, but I do know, like, during the school year, I don't write as much unless it's for assignments, just because I got sociology as other classes. And that's part of why I try and take creative writing classes too, to make sure that I am still writing throughout the year.
Did you like the workshop process? Was that the first workshopping that you'd done before?
University is the first. I did like intro courses in my first year, but that was the first time that I ever did like full workshopping on writing. And I find workshopping on creative writing stories and workshopping poetry to be completely different for me. And short story writing was like really easy to get into and stuff. I didn't mind it, but I found like poetry was a little bit harder for it because I've never done it before, and it felt like I especially like the editing process with Portal, I'd write something and people would give me feedback and they'll be like, change that, reword that, switch that, and it felt like if you made like a painting or a drawing and somebody came in and erased a part and then redrew it, and you're like, whoa. Slow down. So I feel like poetry is a lot more personal, especially for me, because it always has been that emotional dump that it's hard and different to let people change things, but it's making sure that you don't have like a personal attachment or taking that out on the person editing it. I know I don't think I did anything like that, but I was very difficult, I feel, when I was editing with the Portal editors, because I was like, I don't want to do that.
Did you find that difficult to have, or like, did you take their advice, but then do your own spin on it, or did you?
I tried to do that. Yeah, I've never had an actual editor before too, so it was like a whole new experience for me, and I felt really bad because I'm like, I don't know if I should be saying no to this or if I should trust them or like what's what, and it was a lot of gut for me, and I feel bad if I was difficult. I don't know if I was or not, but
I don't know either.
I like the outcome.
It's okay to be difficult. It's
I just accepted it. I was like, oh.
It's your name on the poem ultimately, right? So it has to be your words.
Yeah, but it was definitely a good experience. I really did enjoy it, and it really helped me learn a lot, and especially with editing and actual like what actual editing from an editor would be like. So that was nice to get that experience.
On your first submission as well, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, and especially because I think I've only told like 3 people that I actually have this coming out to. I haven't told a lot of like my personal people until like the advertising for it comes out. I don't really share much about it, so it's exciting.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. Where do you like to write?
Honestly, mostly only ever in my room. That's where I get to like get in my vibe and close the door, and don't have any distractions, kind of just sit there. And I like to always write by hand, so I write everything by hand first, and then I usually go and I write on the computer.
That's what I do too. I write in notebooks longhand and then type it in, and usually as I type it in, stuff pops out as well.
Even when I'm in classes, or when I was in classes, and I'd just be like daydreaming, and then I'd like write stuff off in my notebook, and I have to go flip through school notebooks to find poems. And
Are you submitting more as well, or
not at the moment, but I'm not taking any summer classes, so I'm hoping maybe in the summer to look around and submit some more. I definitely think it's something that I want to start doing, especially having such a good experience and good feedback from the editors that I had. It's something that I want to go experience again and try more with, so I'm hoping to.
Well, it's really exciting. Your poem was very strong, or is very strong in the submissions. I think it got quite a few votes. So it's it's a really great poem, and it's really exciting that it's coming out next month, and you'll have it in your hand in a magazine. And thank you so much for doing this interview and reading. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having an interview with me. I was so shocked. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Portal Portfolio Series. Portal is a literary magazine published by students at Vancouver Island University's Creative Writing and Journalism Department on the territories of the Snuneymuxw, Quw'utsun, and Tla'amin First Nations. For more information about Portal's portfolio series, please visit portalmagazine.ca.